And please limit your questions to one, except for His Excellency Ambassador Majid, who will actually have to leave right after his remarks. So we'll take one or two questions after that. I'll introduce our panel of speakers for today. Ambassador Majid Swedi, Director General and Special Representative of COP28. Dr. Vera Songwe, Co-Chair of the Independent High-Level Expert Group. Dr. Mahmoud Muhiddin, High-Level Champion for COP27. Dane McQueen, Director of Partnerships at COP28. Now, Ambassador Majid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Everybody, thank you so much for being here with us on what's been a very exciting and long day, I'm sure, for all of you, as it has been for us. The work hasn't stopped, and that's why, unfortunately, I have to leave you a little early, but we'll leave you with this wonderful panel that we have here to elaborate on some of the great things that have been happening today. I want to start by saying we have more than 150 world leaders here, more than 25,000 attendees in the Blue Zone alone. And we come into day one confident that of what we could deliver. And we've seen tremendous momentum building over recent weeks. And I'm delighted that the momentum has already translated into action on so many fronts here at COP28. First and foremost, solving climate change requires fixing global finance. There are barriers with our current financial system that prevents adaptation and mitigation climate finance from reaching emerging market countries in the developing world, and particularly in the global south. We need to raise 2.4 trillion by 2030. Meeting the need requires an approach that seeks to catalyze private sector investment while seeking structural change. In today's plenary, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, President of the UAE, launched the world's largest private market climate vehicle, Altera, with 30 billion that will mobilize a further 250 billion by 2030. The UAE also pledged 200 million to the IMF's Resilience Sustainability Trust. We then sought to tackle the necessary structural change by publishing the UAE Declaration on Climate Finance to align on a 10-point plan to fix climate finance. And we'll hear more about this from Her Excellency Dr. Songwe. I'm grateful for her and the other members of the International High-Level Expert Group and their hard work to bring this to fruition. Elsewhere, we convened 600 businesses and philanthropies who have committed to mobilizing 4 billion during the Business and Philanthropy Climate Forum. We also hosted facilitated the Innovate for Climate Tech Coalition to develop the global climate tech ecosystem. Food systems also require transformation. It accounts for about 30% of total emissions. Today, 134 countries signed the UAE Food and Agriculture Declaration, which will include food systems transformation in national climate plans by 2025. And last but by no means least, local leaders launched a coalition calling on governments to consult regional governments when formulating 134 NDCs and to increase subnational climate finance. And tomorrow will be another big day. We'll be focusing on fast-tracking the energy transition, building the energy system of tomorrow while decarbonizing the energy system of today. As you know, we've been using our deep experience across the entire energy sector and working with industry to develop ambitious and actionable solutions that will allow us to course correct and close the gaps to 2030. And I would encourage you all to stay tuned to learn more about these solutions tomorrow. The World Climate Action Summit is ongoing, and we'll be calling on global leaders to deliver a high ambition decision in response to the global stocktake, and to act on all climate priorities, including health. I'm sure there will be plenty of exciting stories for you all to cover. That's enough, I think, from me, so I will hand over to my esteemed colleagues who can share some more detail and developments of the day. And as Sarah said, I'm happy to take a couple of questions before I leave, and I do apologize. As you can imagine, we're trying to cover a lot of ground as a COP28 team today.
Thank you, Ambassador Majid. We'll now take 2 questions direct for Ambassador Majid. Please state your name and your media outlet. Gentleman in the first row.
Thank you. Seth Borenstein. Seth Borenstein, the Associated Press. Ambassador, today the Secretary General was quite blunt, saying phase out of fossil fuels, saying we don't want any of this abatement silliness. You say you cannot solve this, the fire hose with fossil fuels. 106 nations signed a document saying phase out, not phase down. The presidency put out a document today talking about phase down. Is there a red line in the presidency against phase out? What is it about phase out that the presidency has a problem with? And is it because it is run by an oil executive?
Thank you so much for this question. I'm so glad you asked it. Look, we as a COP presidency, we are here to convene the conversation. The SG has been a leader on this, and we're really grateful for all his support. We've been engaging with him from day one. He has his views about the language that should be there, but there are many, many views out there. And we know that this is a conference of parties of 198 countries. All of them have many differing views, even amongst those ones who want the language that you say. Our job as a COP presidency is not to have red lines. We don't have red lines. We have all year long. In fact, I think that we can celebrate that the fact that this COP presidency has been very clear that we need to discuss energy in the energy system. We need to discuss how we're going to deliver fossil fuel language. We've convened the conversation. We've brought the parties together. You are clearly a journalist who's been in this process for very long. You know that this is a negotiated outcome where parties have to come together and agree on a text. It's not our role as a COP president to tell parties what that should be. Our job is to bring them together, to create the space, to create the opportunities, and then when we get consensus, hopefully around a language that makes sense, we'll support that. And I think that that's what we've been doing as a COP president. Our COP president is the CEO of our national oil company, but he's also chairman of Masdar. He's also chairman of our renewable energy company. He has been integral in growing our energy system, and he has been a champion of renewables, and we've delivered on many of we've put forward a tripling of renewable energy target that was delivered at G20, and we believe will be delivered here at COP28 as well. And I think that now we need the negotiators, the parties to come together. We've created the opportunity, we've created the space, and we've encouraged the conversation, and now we need the parties to come together and decide what the solutions are.
Thank you, Ambassador Majid. We'll take one more question for Ambassador Majid. Any questions?
You've all heard enough from me today, I know.
No questions.
I've heard enough from me too as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate all of your time, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll resume with the remarks. I'll pass the floor on to Dr. Vera Songwe to deliver her remarks.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Yes, okay, perfect. No, thank you. Let me thank Ambassador Majid as he's walking away, first of all, for UAE's really good steering of this COP28. I think that part of the reason why everything is also going seamlessly, and I think one of the good things, at least announcements that we have heard, is around sort of building trust and the Loss and Damage Fund. And as we all know, the Loss and Damage Fund was snatched out of the mouth of COP27, and it was the gift to the world from the Egyptian COP27, was then the Loss and Damage Fund, which came after midnight of long discussions, and we never really thought it was going to go somewhere. And I think that the concretization of that, its governance structures, and now even getting resources into the fund is a really powerful part of action, and where I think that COP28 wants to be. The report that we just finished on the independent high-level expert group really says two things. It says, time is of the essence. We heard that from the Secretary General this morning. And so what we need is acceleration and implementation. We are seeing everywhere that the financing gap is widening. We need at least $2.4 trillion annually from now until 2030 to be able to close and heal the planet in some sense. And healing our planet is going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take all of us, and it's going to take all of us working tirelessly at scale. I think what the climate finance framework did today was begin to lay the groundwork for three things. One, collective action. And one of the other things we've heard a lot today, and which our report talks about, is opportunity for all. And we also heard President Ruto talk about that. I think inside the bucket on opportunity for all is also about the financing. When we talk about $2.4 trillion, we're talking about $1.4 trillion, which is domestic resource mobilization. In that domestic resource mobilization, there has to be, first of all, economic activity, economic revival that then begins to deliver on good economies that can, provide taxation. And that's when we talk about domestic resource mobilization is taxation. But there is also carbon pricing and carbon taxes, and we heard that for those of you who were in the session before. Can we also, and there is a lot of work under the French presidency around, what can we do around more global taxation. And the third bucket, I think, of the finance framework and of our report is delivering at scale. There's a lot of initiatives that are happening, laudable initiatives, but each one of them too small to make a dent. We have no time to continue doing little small, let me put my stamp, let me put my map on a project. We're saving the planet, we're healing the planet, we're ensuring our sustainability and our future, and to do that, we must do it at scale. So if something works, we need to grow it, we need to expand it, and we need to do it rapidly. And I think that's really, again, where we want to sort of see more work. To do that, we need the private sector. The public sector, yes, is going to always be there. We need a bigger, we need a better, we need a bolder public sector. I was fortunate to work with N.K. Singh and Larry Summers on the IEG MDB report. But even all of the MDBs put together are about $120 billion. If we triple the financing to them and increase their capital, we will get to $400 billion maximum. I just said we need $1 trillion of external financing. So the other $600 billion is going to have to come from the private sector. To do that, we need to begin to design de-risking tools. We need guarantees that will bring them more to the table. We need, of course, in the cheapest, fastest way of de-risking is good policies. And to put good policies in place, we need the MDBs, we need the countries themselves to perfect their country platforms. We need them to put the right policies in place that would allow for the kind of investment that is needed, not just in we're talking about two kinds of energy, and the energy transition is the largest transition we need. Of the $2.4 trillion that we need, $1.5 trillion is the energy transition. There's a huge amount of that conversation that needs to happen around the energy transition. For that, you need good policies. You need cost-reflective tariffs. You need phasing out of coal. You need the possibility for integrity in the carbon market so we can actually find the resources to transition. I think these are all the kinds of things that will allow us to, one, do the scale, provide opportunity for all, and make sure that there is collective action that rebuilds trust. I think something that we have heard a lot in this COP is the need to rebuild trust, and the fact that we have the loss and damage fund that is here today allows us to say that I think we are well on our way to hopefully rebuilding that trust in a way that delivers on the ambition of net zero for all of us and a much healed planet for ourselves now. Before we used to talk about the next generation. I think now we need it for us because we're living in the middle of it. And once again, I think that the UAE presidency and the work that we're doing under the independent high-level expert group, hopefully that the analytics that we're bringing to the table will help to provide the information and the resources and the kinds of thinking that is needed to help us move this agenda much faster forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vera. With that, I pass the floor to Dr. Mahmoud.
Thank you so much. So earlier today, I was in a meeting with the business leaders, and one of them raised a question, why for a change we don't really get something happening from a COP to the other. There are many recommendations, many suggestions, but there is a very little follow-up. And I think what Vera just mentioned in the case of the loss and damage fund recommended by COP27 was one of the main outcomes of the discussions in the preparation of COP27 and the good work by the Transitional Committee. And to start the events yesterday by the strong announcement of the operationalization of the loss and damage fund is a very good start for this COP. This will create its certain dynamics. It's not just about the creation of the fund, which was last year, the operationalization of the fund, which is starting by this COP, but basically about the adequate funding and the criteria for disbursement and the agility of the newly born fund and its adequate governance. So it's a start of good dynamic there. And the other thing that this fund will alert us again to what I mentioned during last year's COP, and I'm repeating it, that we are facing a climate finance based on the gaps mentioned just by Vera now, that is very much insufficient, inefficient, and unfair. And any attempt or initiative that can make the system a fair one with less insufficiency and perhaps with better efficiency in delivery, like the initiative declared today by Samo Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, His Highness Mohammed bin Zayed, the President of the UAE, with the $30 billion of promising not just of finance, but with capacity development, with technical assistance, with potential of leveraging. That's a good start, especially with the aim to go for as much as 150 billion by 2030. This is all steps in the right direction, but we shouldn't really be forgetting, as emphasized today by Excellency Dr. Sultan, that one initiative alone will not solve the problems of the financial system. A confirmation of that came from two reports. One is our assets to flows report, which meaning the team working as climate champions, partnering with GFANs, with the regional economic commissions, with BCG and others, trying to answer this old question about the pipeline of bankable and investable projects. And we had an update on the global climate finance, again citing the good work by Nick Stern and Vera Songwe. But again, if we are not happy with this approach, there is another, which was the global climate finance report that came out just a few hours ago from the Climate Policy Initiative and the Global Center for Adaptation. It's telling me, and you perhaps, interestingly, that yes, there had been some improvement in the global climate finance landscape by seeing doubling of that in the last 2 years to 1.3 trillion annually. This is doubling from where we were back in 2019 to 2020 at only 653. It's available online. However, and unfortunately, global adaptation finance has declined from 7% to around 5%. The share of low-income countries and developing economies is still facing major challenges. The celebration that we're seeing in finance, including for the renewables that had increased and surpassed the investments in fossil fuel during the last 2 years, had happened mainly in advanced economies and few emerging markets, while we see the issues of concern growing, not really put under control during the last couple of years. Actually, capital flows to low-income countries are going to be negative starting next year because of paying back of debts, and this year they already reached zero. So what we need really to have, perhaps as mentioned by His Excellency Majid before he left, and by Vera, But we need really to push the agenda for scaling up and accelerating the work. And that report as well on the assets to flows is telling us that there are opportunities for those who still claim that there are no bankable or investable projects in developing economies. They need to refresh their understanding of what's happening in the field. There is huge demand for that. And for those who claim that there is no assets available committed, they can really revisit what was announced in Glasgow and today as well through the new fund. So what's missing is perhaps more work on the regulatory frameworks, on the incentives, on what we should really be doing better in getting the supply of funds to meet the demand of funds. I'm saying again that the story between the three funds, the Green Climate Fund to be added to the three. I mentioned the Loss and Damage Fund. Now there is the Private Sector Fund. And the Green Climate Fund replenishment is telling us that the world needs to go beyond the 100 billion practically, that public finance is not sufficient, but we cannot really take any other source of finance as a substitute, but as a complement to be leveraged. And there are opportunities, if we understand better the business environment in the developing economies and emerging markets, to translate these funding opportunities not to more loans, not to more debts, because again, as being said, that we cannot solve the climate crisis by creating another debt crisis for developing economies, and we cannot push the agenda further without really having this emphasis on the just energy transition. Perhaps to complement as well what Ambassador Majid answered your excellent question before he left, it's not the story that is always of interest, as if there are two camps of the phasing out or cutting down the emissions. It's the just energy transition. Any country that we have been working with or for insisting on that transition, that would require finance, technology, and incentives. Without the three, we can really have more bold of phrases and statements, but in terms of implementation in the field, they will leave a lot to be desired. What we need definitely is more finance. What we need definitely is more technical cooperation, capacity development, R&D to be available to all, and definitely what we need as well is adequate incentive structure. By then, we can really put more bold languages, but I think as we now see it, I think coming from a developing economy and emerging markets kind of environment, I would insist on the just energy transition to cater for the needs of those who are deprived from access to electricity, for those who have been suffering by means of cooking that belongs to medieval ways, and we need to provide the alternatives by the renewables, but we need again finance. Last year I mentioned where is the money, where is the finance, and we're quoted, I think, positively in that one. We started to get that, 30 billion with its multiplier. It could really help, but this is just a good start. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahmoud. Dane, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, so it was a quite good day for food and for subnational action, which are two other topics that we really featured within our presidency program. When we started our consultations about 18 months ago, even prior to Sharm, we knew we had the mandate of the global stocktake, and so we kept asking people, what is it that you want to see? What are the gaps that you want to fill? And we kept hearing food, food, food. But people said, do it, but be careful, or do it and you'll probably fail. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but we ended up with 134 very, very diverse countries, and being told that a couple more signatories have come in after the deadline that represent 70% of global food production. And again, just lots of different regions and economic structures. COPs are these kind of normative platforms, and so having that head of state government level support for new action and new finance is a really great signal. And what we've also tried to do is to then pair that political momentum with some initial finance and coming from different quarters again. So we were very pleased today that Her Excellency Maryam Al-Mahari, our Minister of Climate Change and Environment, who's also our food champion for COP28, announced a $200 million partnership with Bill Gates focused on food innovation. So the most of that will go into the CGIAR, which is a great network of research, food food research centers, and mostly in developing countries, and then also into our Aim for Climate platform, which we founded with the US at COP26, and has an innovation sprint program that we'll be pulling from for these high impact technologies to invest more money in. We also saw some great announcements from the private sector, from large agricultural companies and farmers associations who have agreed on regenerative agriculture targets for 2030. It represents almost $2 billion of investment into this more nature-positive type of agriculture, and we saw great engagement from a diversity of non-government stakeholders who signed a kind of complementary pledge alongside the food declaration that we brought to the table. And as you might know, in another room, the Local Climate Action Summit is happening. And this has been a partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies that has brought a historic number, I think it's over 500 now, of subnational officials into the COP, into the summit, so not in a venue outside. And we've used this pool to mainstream these perspectives across our different work streams and events these 2 weeks. Again, with this focus on having more inclusion in climate strategies from subnational actors. And there's been a commitment from about 60 countries now to include mayors and governors in their next round of indices for COP30. So again, a nice sign of new ambition being brought in to the process, and with again a very nice and diverse group of countries behind it. Over.
Thank you, Dane, and thank you all for your remarks. We'll now open the floor for questions. Please state, again, just to remind you, please state your name and your media outlet and who your question is directed to. Lady in the back, please.
Thank you. My name is Alejandra Cámara from Mañana Profesional, and I would like to go back to the fossil fuels industry. We are talking here about phasing off. We've been talking that for the last 30 years, and that conversation can go on for 20 more years. My question right now is, what are the discussions about efficiency in flaring, venting, efficiency in upstream, downstream of the fossil fuel, and subsidies? In G20, we are still talking about subsidies to that sector. What are we doing about that? Because my feeling is that it would be better to try to abate that and then talk about phasing off fossil fuels.
Thank you. We can take, please.
What you want to take? I think maybe it's easier to take.
Okay, we can take another, please, sir.
George Hay from Reuters Breaking Views. There's a question for Vera and Mahmoud. The Independent High-Level Expert Group has a report that says we need $1 trillion of flows from developed to developing world by 2030. I just wanted you to, if you could just contextualize the fund that came out today that the UAE announced. I mean, they were talking about $5 billion of concessional finance, which is clearly, a good start. But could you just give us a sense of how you think about that? Is that a kind of little more than a start, or just is it more than that? And how do you get up to that $1 trillion based with these kind of vehicles? Thanks.
Any more questions? And then we'll comment on them, please. Lady in the second row.
Hi, I'm Sajila from Gulf News. I wanted to ask any of you if you could give me the total amount of pledges made towards Lausanne Fund today. We had the figures from yesterday. And
sorry, could you state who your question is directed to?
To anyone who had the figures.
To anyone who has the number.
Yeah, anybody who is able to tell me. Yeah. And also, Mr. Din, if you could tell me about the total amount that UAE has pledged towards various funds today. There have been too many today. So if you could give us a breakdown and total. Yeah.
Thank you. Lady, fifth row.
Hi, my name is Simran Sirur. I'm a journalist with Monkey, India. For Dr. Vera, I had a question about climate finance. You said that tripling MDB giving lending is still not going to cut it, and we have to rely on private finance. So how can that private finance come? Because it's not coming for adaptation purposes. And relatedly, your thoughts on carbon trade, not carbon trade, sorry, on initiatives like the CBAM and levies on shipping, on aviation, etc. And if that is a solution, then how can that be done in an equitable way? Thanks.
We'll give you a final question already.
Seth Borenstein from AP again, and I'm not really sure anyone could answer this, so I don't even know who, but there were two leaders who were on the schedule to speak who did not, and I was wondering if you can give us any idea of what happened. Obviously, one was Israel's President Herzog, and the other was Prince Mohammed bin Saud of Saudi Arabia. They were both scheduled, and we never saw them. What happened? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with Dr. Barron. Would you like to?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think on the speaking arrangements, you'll have to talk to the UN. But on the things that are within our control and within our report, first, thank you very much for the questions. I think you're spot on the subsidies issue. My sense is that, today we have anyway, if we take the IMF's numbers, somewhere between, 7%, $7 trillion worth of combined both production and consumption subsidies. I like to split them because there tends always to be a lot of conversation on the consumption subsidies, which is the subsidies that developing countries gave their countries to sort of reduce the price of fuel. But there is a huge amount of subsidies that are given by developed countries to help support the development of more fuel. And that is not often talked about as the sort of consumption subsidies what Pakistan and Egypt and Nigeria do. Actually, the good news is that on the developing country side, because of the difficulties post-COVID and all, on the financing side, we have actually seen a lot of countries, Egypt, Nigeria, I think Pakistan is thinking about it, phasing out on sort of subsidies to fossil fuel consumption. What we have actually seen on the other side is the developed countries increasing subsidies for fossil fuels. So I think when we're talking even about the just transition and equity, this is an important conversation that we have to have, and I don't think we're having enough of it. And you're very right. If we phased out those subsidies on the production side, and we're able to then rechannel those resources even into the MDBs, a lot of the resources we're asking for, will we meet them? We will hit our targets already. So that's an important point. But the next point is also we cannot immediately phase out on fossil fuels because the science and the technology is not there yet to meet the energy demands of the whole world. And this is the IEA saying it, this is not me, so you can go read the IEA. So we do need a lot more, some investment to phase out, and this is the transition finance conversation. You need people to phase out from coal, but you need them to be able to then fund whatever is going to be the new technology that they go into, be it nuclear, be it, today we were just talking about how we can actually use hydrogen to produce a lot more energy and actually fast track the gas production process so that we can actually phase it out much faster because it will become cheaper. So I think we need the technology to do that, to be able to phase out some of these things. That links to the carbon conversation. I think what the carbon pricing and the carbon markets, and we've worked a lot on this, are again, for me, a just transition question. We've spent a lot of time talking about, the integrity of carbon markets. We spent 2.5 years talking about the integrity of carbon markets. For those 2.5 years, what has essentially happened is that we've almost had a very disorderly carbon markets environment, which essentially means that developing and emerging market economies, and particularly rural and local communities, are actually being taken advantage of. So the carbon DNA that you buy at $75 in Norway, you buy in Kenya for $5, because they say, oh, we don't know the integrity, we cannot vouch for the integrity of this carbon, so we buy it very cheap, right? And what we need to do is build a system, as opposed to just keep talking about it. Let's put the governance system in place and get on with it in a way that allows for a lot of these local communities to be able to actually price their carbon. I always say, in the peatlands in Africa, we are sequestering tons, 3 years of carbon every year. Somebody needs to be able to get rewarded for that so that they can invest it in the energy access and energy affordability, and we're not seeing that. And so I think on the carbon pricing, I think hopefully in this COP we will have some announcements on moving the bar forward a little bit on carbon pricing and making sure that we get to a place which is compliance. We want to get to compliance. We will go through voluntary because we don't yet have time to get to compliance, but compliance is the last point. Above that is, of course, climate change is a global public good. Anybody who has emitted has created a global public bad. Externalities, who says externalities, says taxation. The problem is that we don't have a governance system for global taxation. And that is one of the things that has held us back a lot. It's very easy to have national taxation. And so the levies on the shipping and the airline industry and all that are still going to be collected at a national level, have to get approved through national parliaments, and so there is a little bit of a tension there. But my sense is, as Mayor Motley said today, if you look at the fossil fuel industry, they've made trillions of dollars in the last year and a half, not because of efficiencies, but just because of market conditions. If we can tax 1% of that, we will meet the loss and damage gap that we're looking for. I think in the maritime and the airline industry, a lot of conversation has already happened. In Europe, we already have an airline tax. The question is, again, what is the governance system that allows for that to go global and for us to be able to then see whether you can create, maybe it's the World Bank, maybe it's the IMF, that takes, because somebody has to collect it, somebody has to administer it. And we have seen already the struggle even of just setting up a loss and damage fund, which is new, and I think that is part of the sort of taxation problem. But the simplest solution would be a global tax on carbon, which will allow them to rechannel those resources to where we want to get to. I think there was a question on the CBAM very quickly. We can both answer the CBAM question. The initial response to that is that the CBAM is non-tariff barrier, right? And essentially one of the things that we believe, at least in the developing economies, is that what is happening is Europe is creating another non-tariff barrier to trade, right? And I think in the name of climate change, we have seen actually a closing up of trade and a lot of anti-trade measures being put in place. What we will want to see, because actually the CBAM is a tax on on imports, right? So if you're doing all these bad things inside Europe, you don't get taxed. You want to get taxed if you're Egypt trying to sell steel into Europe. So immediately it becomes a non-competitive process. And so what we would like to do is, one, work first of all on helping countries to move to green steel or green iron ore, green coal, and so we need some resources, because it's a roundabout way of actually getting countries that have not contributed as much to pay even more for the problem, and countries that are contributing to be sort of protected from payment. So I think we do need to relook at these kinds of policies. It's the same thing with the IRA, by the way, the Inflation Reduction Act. It is another subsidy. It's a subsidy from the developed world to the developed world, but it makes investments in the same kinds of activities or projects in the developing world more expensive. Because if I can get a subsidy to do green energy in the United States, why do I try to do it in Brazil or in Cote d'Ivoire? It doesn't make any sense. In the United States, I get 6x because interest rates are high, and I get a subsidy. if I had to go do it in Brazil, I need somebody to help de-risk me. I need to take the risk of going there. I have a foreign currency exchange risk. And so it immediately we are making investments in the emerging and developing world a lot more expensive because we are providing subsidies in the developed world. And I think these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have a lot more of. But the resources that have just been announced, the $30 billion, which hopefully would leverage 4 or 5 billion. So if you do 30 billion, 120 billion of our 1 trillion, that's 10% of the resources. So we cannot be unhappy about it, right? 5 billion will go to the MDBs. We want the MDBs to go to 130 billion, and the rest of the 20 will be in the private sector, which is what we are saying it should do. So I think that combination of 30 billion, 5 billion to MDBs, and 25 billion in the private sector, the masters of the world are already investing in the private sector, and hopefully they can do more. But I think the principle should be all the resources that are on the table are needed, and we need even more. And so we welcome the Altera announcement today as a substantial leap forward in the demand for new resources. I think this is the largest announcement we've had in over a year of new resources to the climate agenda, and we welcome that.
Right, I think Vera had said it all, and let me just complement what she said by a few clarifications. On the issue on the subsidies, the 7% on the global GDP is not very different from what you see in typical countries. So instead of talking about the 7 trillion, this is an aggregation of activities, including in developing economies and emerging markets that are in competition to subsidize the fossil fuel even more than some of the advanced economies as proportion to their GDP and as part of their budgets. The worst news than that is that the figure was roughly 5% until 2019-2020, and it went up to 7 trillion or 7% of GDP just recently to deal with the increases in the oil prices. So the figures mentioned and quoted by Maya Motley, they had somebody who's paying for, to them, and this had been coming out not just from subsidizing or incentivizing the alternatives like renewable energy. In many cases that we're aware of, they were cut from important, equally important bills in education, on health system, in essential services. So the whole thing about domestic resource mobilization is about prioritization and having an open dialogue, not just about energy and adaptation, but basically about where the whole matter is related to the SDGs at large, including those who are fighting poverty or enhancing opportunities in the labor market or dealing with gender issues. There is no mention about them, and that's why we are in disaster. If we are really facing a crisis in the climate front, we are in a catastrophe when it comes to SDGs, because we are only 12% on track for these targets by 2030 as trajectory. So it's basically some decisions that should be made at home in many countries. Nobody is preventing any country from doing that. Can the actions be done here in these negotiations, or is it something related to public choices and public priorities at home with some incentives that need to be put in place? On the question on the 30 billion, our friend just left, but let me just, in his absence, I answer him. The 30 billion is really significant. Yes, you can always relate it to the gaps of the 1 trillion, but if you can compare it to the effort for the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund, that from the 30 countries, we managed to get $9.3 billion until now, and we're hoping that for the remaining 5 countries to contribute, that can tell you something about mobilization of resources and what kind of political and economic environment that we're living in. So for a country to put a 30 billion and we're expecting that when an announcement of the $4.5 billion was made for Africa when we were there in September. So for a global initiative by one country to be 30 billion, it should be commended. And then we should be asking what other countries are doing in their domain, and that could really enhance a kind of a competition to do better in the future in this kind of support by investment, by equity, and less by debt. And I hope that that can encourage as well more funding to the adaptation front, as we've been knowing that the share of adaptation have been declining, and the private sector participation in that front is no more than 3% and is not moving. So if this fund as well can really incentivize and encourage more work, especially if it is going to be focusing on Africa and low-income countries and developing economies worldwide, that will be requiring more attention to adaptation. My very final point is again on the CBAM. I can tell you countries like mine are very much between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the CBAM, and the hard place could be the IRA. And both have been put, I would say, these are priorities for countries based on their national interest, but they have spillovers and they have externalities. IRA is great for the US, as seen by their politicians, where they had the agreements by the Republicans and Democrats to do it. But as Vera mentioned, it makes many of competing industry not necessarily as an advantage. And we are talking about real case of projects that were after investments in outside the US, including in some of the OECD countries, but they are not feasible anymore because of this generosity of subsidy. That means, in the spirit of international cooperation, that could really be revised. In the spirit of international cooperation, while these big initiatives are being done, and the US is not alone. The EU has its own green initiatives, Korea, Japan. Some of the advanced economies have this issue of let's do it through the supply chain and not to prevent others from being part of this kind of big scheme of things, and perhaps there could be improvements in technology and R&D, but definitely in the short term, mid-term, there will be major casualties. CBAM, some exporters today from Africa in particular are seeing it as a disaster because of the following, that they are not ready to engage, even if they are giving 2 years to comply. The forms are already being filled starting in October. There are 4 ways to deal with it, and I'll stop. First, as China did a few days ago, asking a clarification whether these measures are 100% compatible with WTO measures or not. And that will take a while because WTO is evidence-based. If the harm is not established today, they need to come later by that. But meanwhile, this is calling for the decarbonization of the hard-to-abate sectors: cement, steel, aluminum, the list of 5 areas. That is an investment opportunity. Actually, if I'm an investor in these sectors, I would really approach that newly born fund and I say, well, this could be a good opportunity for decarbonization with good results as well, and to avoid the heavy levy that's not being named tariff, is not being even called a levy, it's just being called CBAM. The third area of work is on the carbon markets. And again, your options either to buy these expensive certificates from the EU or to establish carbon markets voluntary one that could be verified with integrity, as mentioned by Vera. And in this case, the issue could be minimized. Meanwhile, it's a tough world out there, and it's good that we have seen some good attempts, like last year last year announcement of the loss and damage, the operationalization yesterday, and today we see this great initiative of the 30 billion. What we need to see is basically multiples of 30 billion. Without saying, well, 30 billion may not really be big enough, I think it's a good start for the world to have this kind of an example to follow. Thank you.
Thank you all for your remarks. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for questions today. I'd really like to express our gratitude for our speakers and for all of you for being with us today, and we'll see you back here again tomorrow.
Maybe, Sarah, if I could just come in quickly on 2 presidency-related questions that a couple of people had asked. On loss and damage, there were some new announcements today. I saw some celebration emojis in our WhatsApp chat. My colleagues at the back have the updated numbers, or they're being tabulated. And then on the UAE announcements and contributions, obviously yesterday there was the 100 million for the loss and damage fund. Today there was Altera, there was 100 million for food innovation, 200 million for SDR reallocation through the IMF Resilience and Sustainability Trust. I hope I'm being comprehensive, and do stay tuned for tomorrow.
Thank you.
We'll come here.
We will no longer be taking any more questions. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back here again tomorrow at 5 p.m.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you once again.
Excellent. Barakallah feek. Shukran.